Half a day, everybody. Jason Salas here, and the Olympics are here now. And here in the studio is a good friend of ours, Dr. KristiAnna Whitman. She is an expert in the field of mental health. And Doc, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Viva Liberation.
Viva Guam.
Okay, and yeah, and we all cheer Guam. We celebrate liberation. We also celebrate our athletes who are over in Paris competing right now. Now, you gave a very wonderful talk right up the street from us here at the Guam Football Association field about mental toughness within the scope of athletics, right? Yeah. Those were obviously to younger soccer athletes. I'd like to kind of continue that context, if you would, when it comes to Olympians, because these are the elite of the elite. And these days, sports is measured not just by, how physically fit you are, but how mentally tough you can be and the competitive mindset you have that can propel you further probably than your body and your mind would allow you to. So how much do you know about that subject and really getting tough?
Right. Well, I don't know if I would consider myself a super expert in that area, but I will say that with regards to mental health and our young athletes, right, the talk we gave at GFA was really about promoting mental health and just bringing up the conversation, especially in our young athletes, with regards to being comfortable and normalizing those feelings of who do I talk to, right? Where do I get help? What resources do I have? But also just bringing up that idea that you can consider and think about your mental health. And that can kind of segue to our professional or elite athletes, right, who are at the Olympics. I'm not sure how old the youngest person is, but that takes a lot of resilience, a lot of perseverance to engage in not only the training that has taken them to get there, but also just being in that space. Right before we were talking about just being in that crowd, right, and on that platform and on that stage, and how much you have to be prepared to, to endure that, right?
And sports is so binary because typically you either win or you lose.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
I know from my own coverage of sports, it's typically, there are some people who say, okay, if I lose a match and it's very, very high profile, this is temporarily soul crushing, but in the long term, it's character building. Other people, they say it really, really affects them for a very long time.
Absolutely. So that's it takes a lot. And that's where I guess I say it's really important in terms of our young athletes starting that, to plant that seed and giving them the resources and space to have those conversations. Who are their teammates? Who are their coaches? Are their coaches prepared to have those conversations with them? Are their families prepared, right, in terms of winning or losing, to receive them after that experience? So I guess for those athletes who are in Paris now and competing, who are their people, right? And who are I know it's an intimate group. I'm not sure how much interaction they're going to have as a Guam team, or if they're separated by sport. Unfortunately, I'm not an elite athlete who's had that experience, but I think that knowing who you have on your side is also a big piece of it, and what resources you have, not only during this time that they're there in Paris and over the Olympics, but when they return home, right? And back into that transition of the post competition training and what that looks like, and the recovery, not only physical recovery, but mental recovery, and what that might look like for each of those athletes.
Now, of course, traditionally when we talk about physical conditioning, they say, you work out, eat very well, get your rest, and then your body is in tip-top condition, and then you have to take a break at some point because you don't want to overdo it.
Right.
When it comes to the mind and your mental fitness, is it kind of the same thing? You can't just be mentally tough all the time, 24/7?
Absolutely, and I think that's where, again, having those skills and built into you, from in your training, that needs to be really incorporated into your training, and I hope that it is, right? What skills do you have to kind of debrief, not just your physical self, right? You have all these recovery techniques that you do physically, but also your mental health, right? How can we take a pause in between? How can we kind of, recover from all that really intense activity, right? Because I'm sure after a couple weeks of going through that grueling effort, and then those months and months, years of training, you need to take a pause, right? And that's really difficult to do, right? You kind of have that post-training experience, and I'm sure there's some sort of experience of having to, how do you deal with that, right? Kind of the withdrawals of the training and all those efforts, and then how much time do you give yourself to start again, right? I know some of these athletes don't give themselves that much time to, kind of take a break, but
some of the ones that just found out they were on our Olympic team, they had 2 days literally, and then they headed off to northern France.
Yeah, it's impossible to imagine as I don't know another word, but as a lay person, right? Someone who's not in that space. But I think, again, building up those skills for how can I, what skills do I have in terms of taking care of myself, and seeing just not I can't be I can't just be training for the physical side of it, but I have to also be training for the mental side of it, right? And like, so who's going to support me along the way? You know, you have your coaches to support you in the physical efforts, and who are your mental coaches, right? Who are your, and I hope that that support system is available and in place for these athletes who are.
Now, I have read and I've studied for many years, going all the way back to when I was watching the Olympics as a little kid, is they said the one thing that makes these world-class athletes truly stand apart from their peers is it the fact that they emote better than anybody else. It's, you know, when they have a victory, grown men openly cry, back when that wasn't, you know, the in vogue thing to do. You know, like when you lose, you know, you weep, but for the moment you pick yourself up and everything like that. Is that kind of like expression of and release, I guess, of what you're feeling inside? That is a healthy aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, like you want positive ways of emoting, right? And so that's definitely healthy. And you bring up something right there, right, with regards to the male counterparts, right, who are emoting in ways that it might not seem familiar to people, because men don't necessarily emote that way regularly, right? But when you see them, like, you know, compete in this really feat of like something physical, it's okay, right? So how can we kind of normalize that same type of emotion in spaces where you're not necessarily going through this physical effort, but something where you're actually just, you know, you're going through grief, or you're going through loss, you know, and kind of allowing that, you know, and seeing those images. So I think even like in terms of like the coverage, even if we're not a part of the Olympics in person, when we're seeing the coverage, paying attention to those stories, right? That's why I love the human stories, you know, the human interest stories of the Olympics, because you see that, you see what got those people, those athletes to that space, and what is allowing them to feel so deeply, right? In terms of winning or losing or what have you, or even the way they respond to their teammates, right? It's like, it's such a beautiful aspect of the sport also, right? And I see you, and you know, like we can talk all day about it, because that's the part that allows the layperson to enjoy the Olympics, right?
Okay, and then finally, let's talk about, I mean, you know, we could get into the neuroscience and we'd be here for days and everything. She literally has written a dissertation on this, but when it comes to the actual tangible, measurable positive impacts of positive mental attitude. I mean, that really does help your performance, help your health, and help your game.
Absolutely, absolutely. People who are having experience feelings of anxiety or depression, they're typically not, you know, that there are correlations with regards to your physical fitness. So in the same way, right, if you're in a good space with regards to your mental health, that's going to improve your physicality, right, and your physical game. It's also going to prepare you in terms of like how quickly can you recover in between a loss, right, or in between a match, or whatever it is you're competing at.
Your ability to bounce back and be resilient.
Absolutely. So, you know, I guess, you know, if there was anything we can take away from this, you know, whether or not we're engaged as athletes, or, you know, whatever level of effort we are as athletes or in sport, I think, you know, just learning from these athletes is something that like we can start to build up and develop these skills. If we're parents, building that up in our young, you know, our kids, or for teachers or coaches, how can we start to develop that in our young people, right? How can we have them practice that? And then also really be open about what emotions they're experiencing throughout, whether it's through training, winning, losing, what have you, right? And knowing the resources, who are the resources around them to support that, you know, those feelings also.
Very excellent. Dr. KristiAnna Whitman is certainly a member who is of our community, who is cheering on Team Guam, as am I, and as are everybody. She cheers for ND football really hardcore as an alum, but as a proud Guamanian, you're certainly cheering our 8 athletes over there who are fighting for the gold.
Absolutely. Viva Guam, and viva our Olympic team, and everyone else who's watching.
There you go. Go 671.
Going for Gold is presented to you by Prime Hydration and C2O Coconut Water, distributed by PDC Wholesale.